turn that song back on.
Why?
Because it's my favorite song in the world, and I need it because I love it.
Hey, you! So, I think we can all agree that my last two videos were perfect masterpieces that were unanimously beloved by all. And whilst their majesty is unquestionably pristine, one tiny weeny little thing about them is that I didn't really construct a lot of the conclusions or the analysis by myself. I got all my info from book learning, but as we all know, street smarts is where it's at. So with this video, I made it my goal to make it a bit shorter and simpler by picking a set of films without any real academic discussion behind them, meaning that some of the views presented may be far more linked to my personal feelings, but also... Oh, Ryan Hollinger made a video on them? Well, great, maybe I should just become a Minecraft channel, because I don't really know why they... I always thought the found footage horror was kinda whack. The format, for anyone who escaped some sort of government testing facility yesterday, is a style of film in which the footage is presented in a way that makes it appear like the fictional events depicted are a documentation of real things that happened or are happening in our world. Jesus Christ, what a fucking spaghetti of a sentence. Basically, it's generally fake documentation of made up stuff that they pretend is real. I'm calling it a subgenre here, but there's actually a lot of debate as to whether that's the case. Critic Xavier Aldana Reyes argues the term refers more to the style the films are created in rather than their genre, whilst David Bordwell refers to the technique as merely a narrative gimmick. Personally, whilst I concede that categorizing the film into a specific subgenre is, of course, incredibly limiting, I'd argue that very few films have really broken the genre mold enough to fall outside of the subgenre model. If slashers are a subgenre due to their frequent relationship with horror, then found footage should be too, yeah? I've yet to see a found footage rom-com.
Write that down, write that down!
Originally, the phrase found footage was used to describe a specific technique in documentary filmmaking, where film footage is used as evidence of something, like a war documentary with real footage of the storming of Normandy, or the Apollo 11 footage which proves everything in space is in black and white. The term was then stolen by the horror camp, a prophetic move which foreshadowed how they were going to constantly steal from each other all the time. Though the format was famously popularised by 1999's The Blair Witch Project, examples can be seen far earlier with some family-friendly flicks like Cannibal Holocaust and Man Bites Dog. Don't worry, he doesn't actually bite a dog. He kills a lot of people, but the dogs are fine. Despite not being the originator, Blair Witch did kinda establish the specifics of the style which would be later copied. Low-budget features on handheld video cameras shot in semi-first-person formats. The excitingness of this new format, alongside its relative simplicity and cheapness, led to a slew of tons being produced, particularly in the early 2000s, alongside similarly popular subgenres of horror such as remakes and the lovingly named torture porn. Reyes argues the style crescendoed into major mainstream success with 2007's Paranormal Activity, at which point it kinda hit its stride. And by stride, I mean it learned what worked and stopped trying. Found footage generally follows the same aesthetic conventions. It mainly focuses on the idea of realism and the unspoken suggestion that we, as an audience, are voyeuristically watching some hidden, lost recording of real-world events. Usually the camera work is shaky and low quality, most likely being filmed either through stationary security cameras or, more often, a first-person handheld camcorder. Wait, if we're the ones behind the camera, does that make it second person? I mean, I guess we aren't technically the characters holding the camera, so no, but then what are the... In many ways, the main draw of found footage horror is the sense of realism it creates by borrowing techniques and conventions from documentary filmmaking. This can particularly be seen in the examples from the 1980s, which often centered around documentary filmmakers getting themselves into out-of-depth situations, like an episode of The Office, but if Jim got his head caved in. There also tends to be a lot of narrative similarities, such as a penchant for having a group of boys with a single girl, a big argument between the boys with the girls left all emotional and vulnerable, and for some reason, a lot of white people. All of these truths have held strong over the many years of the subgenre's existence. It worked in the 80s, and it works now. But here's the thing, the 80s were 40 years ago. Sure, you can break the films up into various different categories, webcam, monster hunting, home movie, Marlon Wayans. But in the end, the formats are all incredibly similar. As Bordwell puts it, when people look to found footage, they want the same please, only different. And I'm not necessarily saying the similarities are a bad thing. I know that many people love the slasher genre for the same reason, an easy to watch and understand format that each film puts a slightly unique spin on. It just makes innovation difficult. And of course, this happens in every genre. They all start out as a weird experimental production that evolves and grows until they hit a point of success, and then after a certain point of stagnation, they get reinvented again. I mean, the earliest ones started out by copying working concepts from literature and theatre, but like Mr. Joker says, that's life. Look at the Western genre. It became one of the earliest forms of cinema until it hit its stride in the 1940s with the release of films like Stagecoach, and then went largely unchanged until the 1960s with new, darker, anti-heroic features like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Man with No Name trilogy. You could look at superhero films the same way. Growing in the 90s and the 2000s with shit like Blade, Darkman and Spider-Man, and then Iron Man carved out a formula that the MCU and its competitors have been copying ever since. Eventually, those films, like all others, will likely go through a period of postmodernist reinvention, bringing new life to the genre. Hints at it can already be seen with 2019's Brightburn and the Boys TV show. Again though, Watchmen did it in the 80s, so if we could hurry the fuck up. Found footage is the same, but is yet to really reach that point of reinvention. Or has it? Ooh, foreshadowing. With the ongoing lockdown and such, I imagine we're going to get a good few more in the coming years, given the ease of their creation and the now universal relatability. I mean, look at this! It came out at the end of July and was made entirely in lockdown. When I first saw the trailer, I literally thought they were just re-releasing Unfriended, like remastered or something. It's exactly the same! Just watch Searching instead, it's way better! Whilst a few examples over the year caught my eye, I, like many, kind of wrote the subgenre off. They all have their moments, but as I've said, they all felt fairly samey to me. Oh wow, was that opinion challenge? I wonder what film prompted that. Creep is a 2014 found footage horror film. Written, directed and starring Patrick Bryce and Mark Duplass, the film centres on a small-time filmmaker, Aaron, who is hired by a man named Joseph to record footage of him for Joseph's young son. The film falls into the category of found footage Reyes dubs The Killer Video Diary, alongside the likes of August Underground and The Last Horror Movie, but unlike those, it's actually good. Almost immediately, Joseph begins acting like a dang freak. First thing this dude does when meeting a new person is strip down and take a bath. As a shower man myself, this made my skin crawl. But Dibbo, a bathing man? I can get that on Google Images. What is it about this movie that makes it better than the rest? Well, remember earlier when I had that unfunny bit about whether the film's from first or second person perspectives? Well, as we're looking in from Aaron's perspective, the film is largely in first person. We hear his voice, we hear his internal dialogue expressed externally, and we follow his perspective of events from beginning to end. But in certain scenes, Joseph disappears, and in these moments, Aaron is silent. As he moves around the environment, slowly searching for Joseph, it no longer feels like we're watching from a first-person perspective. The easiest way to describe the atmosphere is that it's akin to playing a horror game. Whilst the imagery itself is no worse than your average horror feature, the fact that you are the person interacting with it makes it all the more unnerving. Jump scares and frights are no longer procedural and ignorable, but are triggered instead by your interactions. And the atmosphere of these first-person scenes captures that feeling perfectly. I watched this film with two friends and they said the exact same thing. Every slow, curious step truly does feel like it's you moving towards the unseen threat. Of course, it's a bit ridiculous comparing a film to an interactive medium like games in this way, but I choose this example to highlight the incredible atmosphere that's created. By creating this silence and allowing itself to distance from its characters and plot, the film creates these little pockets of terror, leading to a far subtler and more intense form of horror than is usually presented in these films. Beyond its excellent atmosphere, the film is commendable for branching across multiple categories within the subgenre. At one point, Aaron, frightened of Joseph attacking while he sleeps, leaves the camera on overnight. Suddenly, we've changed completely from the video killer style to the home movies type. We, the camera, are now an entirely separate entity from Aaron and are no longer really first person. At one point, we even see Joseph digging a pit and dumping something inside, only to then realise that we are watching a recording of a recording. I don't even know what type of found footage that is. It's by no means the only film to do this, but unlike most that I've experienced, which starkly block out and make a big show of its various sections, there's a fluidity to Creep that I haven't really seen in any other works. Of course, the film isn't perfect. Some of the limitations of found footage still exist. At one point, the screen goes black and Joseph's muffled voice is heard, with subtitles to help the audience understand what he's saying. Who put those there? Was Aaron in the editing bay at the end of each day, making sure he got the full lossless 4K quality shots of Joseph's funky moves? No, of course not. The real filmmakers put those in there to help us, the real actual human audience, understand the film better. It doesn't fit within the kayfabe of these tapes being found footage, which is a limit inherent to the medium. And of course, the premise is hardly original. The killer video diary was already considered something of a cliche from roughly 20 years prior to this one's creation. Whilst the choice to only focus on 2 characters leads to more intense and unique characterization than is afforded to most, at its core it's still mostly an excuse to see crazy man be wacky and violent, bash head, jump scare, loud noise, blood. But despite these features, I'd say there's far more to love about Creep than not. If anyone were looking for a first time found footage to try and get into the genre, this would be the one I recommend. But wait a minute! All I've done is talk about how this film is a good example of regular found footage. I thought this video was about the evolution of the subgenre. What's with the... Creep 2 is a 2017 found footage horror film. The film opens with a scene of Joseph sitting down and placing a camera to record a conversation with his new victim. The sight is familiar to us, as the slow, drawn-out dialogue scene with mounting tension is exactly what the first one was made up of. With a few playful gestures and nods to the camera, Joseph, now going by Aaron, makes it perfectly clear that this was intentional and that the filmmakers were in on the joke. As the scene slowly plays out, a slight pang of concern hits. It's fine, you know, a good tense scene with a new character, but it's the same. It's exactly the kind of slow burn tension that made up the first half of the first film, only this time lessened by our knowledge of Joseph as a character and what he can do. It's not bad by any means, but it's boring. We've seen it already, and the viewer leans back and prepares for the same experience they've already had, with none of the original's charm. But then something strange happens. Halfway through the scene, Joseph loses interest. He pivots away from their conversation of creepy stalkers and ominous threats, and begins to half-heartedly complain about his own boredom. Joseph, our fictional main character, feels the same mundanity and boredom that the audience does. He knows the tropes of horror and has experienced them before, and now he's tired. He confesses his stalking of his new victim in an annoyed, disinterested manner before killing him quickly. The fun-loving, playful and toying villain we knew from the first film is gone. This is of course my own speculation, but to me, this film is an expression of the creator's frustrations with the genre. Within the first 8 minutes, the film's torn down everything that the original created. So, where do we go from here? Our new protagonist's name is Sarah. Sarah is a YouTuber hoping to make a name for herself amongst the amateur documentary scene by gaining an audience with her niche and somewhat uninteresting videos. Oh, I wonder what that's like. One day, she sees a Craigslist advert from a man who claims to be a serial killer and, as any good YouTuber would, goes to meet him in a remote cabin in the woods. From the get-go, Joseph is doing his usual thing, you know, being creepy and weird. But here's the thing. Sarah is a girl, and she's been dealing with weird, strange, sad little men acting bombastically for attention all her life. So, what do you do when someone's acting childish and aggressive to garner a reaction from you? You just don't react. I think there's a lot to be said for this film's gender representation. A lot of conclusions could be drawn regarding the power dynamics of the two and how Joseph constantly tries to use traditional roles to assert some form of dominance. At one point he even makes them both stripped down nude just to try and make her uncomfortable. But I've already cut out like 2/3 of this video, and so this is not the place to discuss it. Which is why I'm working on another video discussing gender and horror that'll be out soon, maybe, who knows, Anyway, remember when I used the word kayfabe earlier? I know you do, because you're hanging on every word that I say. Kayfabe, for those unfamiliar, is a concept in wrestling which essentially refers to the selling of a specific move. One person can pretend to throw a punch, but the power of said punch relies mostly on the reaction of the person being hit, as they're the ones who show its impact. And Sarah refuses to sell the scares. Every creepy or threatening line by Joseph, every moment of psychological gameplay, every jump scare attempted by him falls completely flat. He gets naked, she follows his lead. He demands she leaves, she just calmly asks why. He tries to scare her with his spooky wolf mask from the first film, and she just shows a keen interest in it. At one point, he steals the camera, much like in the first film, and attempts to deliver a jump scare, only to have her leap out and frighten him. And the strangest thing happens. It becomes funny. With each failed attempt, we see him grow more and more frustrated and upset with his own inability to control her in the way that he wants, as his entire experience just stumbles into pure farce. Perhaps my favourite scene of the whole film is this one, where Joseph attempts to sit in a river and explain his mantra, in reference to a similar sequence from the original, but everything just keeps going wrong. First the river dries up, and then an aeroplane flies past, and then he starts worrying about his ponytail, and then a bird tweets too loudly, and eventually he just goes off and he fucking sulks. This is our fucking Freddy Krueger, our nightmare man that we see in the corners of our eyes as we go to sleep. It's amazing. The film presents these nightmarish horror characters for what they really are. Sad, unhealthy little creatures looking for any scrap of power they can get. And it was this aspect of Creep 2 that really made me truly realise what makes found footage so unique. The interaction with us, the audience. The horror and the tension and the jump scares of most found footage films, even Creep 1, would be pretty much just as effective in creating fear within any form of horror. Look at The Descent, which dances between first person and third person with its horror, and it's pretty much the same level each time. But this film will be nowhere near as effective if we viewed it from a third-person perspective, looking in on Sarah and his interactions. Sure, watching his deterioration from a distance would be entertaining, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as effective. We see him, this character, these events, through our own eyes, and our response is our own. The film isn't Sarah discovering the sad, hilarious truth about this strange man, it's us. Personally, I like the latter half of this film somewhat less than its first, but many of the concepts I've discussed here are explored and expanded upon further. Creep 2 is an expression of exactly what I've been talking about. It's a subversion, a reinvention. It takes the conventions of found footage and recontextualizes them, taking them in an entirely new direction to create an entirely unique experience. Both Bryce and Duplass have expressed a desire to make a third film, but are waiting for a fresh new idea to come along first, rather than simply continue the first or second films. Hey boys, I have some ideas if you're interested. I am, admittedly, still something of a newcomer to the genre, and I'm by no means saying that the Creep films were the first to do all the things I've discussed. But on a personal level, these films honestly made me really like something that I once hated. They nurtured personal growth on an artistic level and gave me a new appreciation for an entire medium of filmmaking. And I think I'll always be pretty grateful for that. Watch Creep. And Creep 2. Please. Hey, thanks for watching. I decided to make a shorter video this time because I couldn't do another 3 months of working on videos. I just don't have the motivation in my bones. Hopefully this one's still pretty good. I've got a few more ideas down the pipeline. I think I've got about 3 or 4 videos planned out. Maybe 5? I don't know, I'll keep at it. I've been reading a lot of One Piece. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe please. It really does help, not only in terms of like growing my channel, but legit just like motivating me to do stuff. Alright, I'll see you next time. Stay epic, gamers.